So, welcome back everybody. I hope you managed to find a good sandwich for your lunch and you haven't been taken over by some sort of march out there. And if you were, I hope they were singing protest songs. So, welcome to this afternoon's session. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next set of 3 speakers in this session. And we're going to start with Claire Rakich. And Claire is a recent graduate of the University of Hertfordshire. In fact, she's recently graduated with her master's degree from there. Congratulations, Claire. So you can read the rest of her biography in the programme, but let me welcome her up to talk to us about Rosemary, I Need You, problematising gender motifs in the singing of folk songs in cinema.
Hello. Thanks, Julia. Yes, hi, I'm Claire, and I'm a folklorist and a folk singer. And today I want to talk to you about a case study I carried out as part of my MA in folklore studies last year. So I examined 15 folk songs in 15 British, Irish and American films across a variety of genres. These spanned a 71-year period from 1950 to 2021. My presentation today will focus on the cinematic motifs I identified in the ways female and male characters perform folk song. And I'm sorry, there will be spoilers. So, for many of us, film is where we first encounter folk song. We only need to look at YouTube comments on film clips of folk songs that I examined to understand how incredibly effective an ambassador for folk song cinema is. People are seeking out folk songs. They're singing them to their children. They're making ringtones on their phones. They're incorporating them into their daily lives. And I wonder how many of us are here because we saw a folk song on film once which set us on this path. But despite all the good that comes with folk songs and increased exposure through film, a price has been exacted. My analysis of gendered folk song performance has, I believe, illuminated decidedly patriarchal and conservative messaging. So what are these tropes? How problematic are they? And by recognising them, how can we help filmmakers of the future to use folk song as a narrative device consciously? For folk song to remain relevant in cinema, it must evolve progressively as diverse voices and alternative attitudes to gender continue to challenge the status quo. So how will cinematic folk song's story unfold? Will it end up a relic of an unenlightened past? Or will our increased knowledge of its use in cinema history bring about a happy ending for us all? So to speak very briefly about my methodology, here are the songs I examined, and I put a QR code here in case anyone wants to take a further look at these. I've done a YouTube playlist of them all. I think all but 2 I was able to find, so if you want to have a proper look, because we can't look at them all today, sadly. So as I wanted to show how folk song is used as a narrative device, I didn't include songs from folk song films, such as 2013's Inside Llewyn Davis or 2000's Oh Brother Where Art Thou? And one of the songs I selected here isn't actually sung at all. Nearer My God to Thee is performed instrumentally by the musicians on the Titanic in the film of the same name from 1998, but I included it here because it's so recognisable as a 19th century Christian folk hymn rather than a piece of music. So I looked at many aspects of on-screen folk song, including the film's genre, the performer's gender, social class, location of their performance, and their song's narrative purpose. And the 2 key cinematic gender motifs I deduced were, 1, that women who sing emotional folk songs obtain love and approval from men, and 2, that men who sing emotional folk songs are probably about to die, or at the very least, undergo horrible trauma. So I'm focusing on songs designed to impart emotion here, instead of bawdy tavern songs or work songs, because it's rare in the films I looked at for women to participate in these. So I wanted to look at how emotion manifests itself through folk song in cinema, depending on whether a male or a female character is performing it. So I really wish we could go through all these films and discuss each one, but we sadly don't have time. If anyone wants to book me for about 3 weeks to talk about this, then, call me. So to demonstrate the existence of these motifs, I first want to show you one clip of female performance in film and speak briefly about other female examples. I'll then do the same with male performance, and finally I'll look at cinematic folk songs that appear to deviate from the established motifs. So, when I say that women who perform folk songs on film gain love or approval, I don't necessarily mean from a romantic partner, although this is frequently the case. But in each of these films, whenever any of these female characters sing, a man falls in love, or his stony heart is melted, or it gives him the courage to go on. I want to play you a fantastic example here from my earliest film, Gone to Earth, from 1950. Has anyone seen it? Oh, there you go. It's amazing. Anyway,
typical.
It's all on YouTube. The whole thing's on YouTube for free. Go and watch it. Not now. So anyway, in this clip, the protagonist, Hazel Williams, has come to sing at a church function with her father and catches the eye of the new vicar. So, I love the ear scratching. I'm in the right company, I think. I think directorial decisions like this, along with close-ups of riveted faces, show very plainly that Hazel is unaware of her own power. That makes her dangerous, and everyone suffers for it in the end. Now, the same folk song motif is detectable in other films, and I now really want to make a calendar of the faces of men in films listening to women sing. Maybe all the proceeds could go to the Portico Library, so let's get on board. So, for example, at the end there, in The Colour Purple, Shug Avery's estranged preacher father reunites with her when he hears her sing, and I love that he's taking off his glasses here in case there was a chance of us missing the symbolism. Both Mr. Boltwood in the middle here reach a point of no return in their devotion to Bathsheba Everdeen in both Far From the Madding Crowd films, and Rosemary Muldoon melts her neighbour Tony Riley's curmudgeonly heart by singing a song his late wife used to sing in the film Wild Mountain Thyme. John Potter and Neil Sorrell, in their work on the history of singing, give examples of the siren in the Odyssey or the German folktale of the Lorelei as the proof of the female's ability to lure through song, and note the links to spellcraft and enchantment. And folklorist Regina Bendix has highlighted the age-old accusation of duplicity levelled at female performers who are cast simultaneously both as objects of desire and as morally compromised. No man in any of these films that I examined got anyone to fall in love with them, but as Potter and Sorrell note, male superior strength and control are a more obvious and direct way in which to wield power. Whether men sing or not is unimportant. And the possible messaging implicit in cinematic folk song that women manipulate men with their voices, whether consciously or not only casts doubt on women's ability to perform out of a genuine impulse or a talent, but feeds into a patriarchal distrust of women. So, by contrast, male characters who convey emotion through folk song seem to change nothing. In each case here, the damage has already been done and disaster is looming. Even though the song is designed to have an emotional impact on the audience, it does appear that the motifs in play are taking care to distance the male characters from their own emotions as much as possible. The performers here instead act as conduits for a collective emotion. Here's Wayfaring Stranger from the 2020 film 1917, in which Schofield, after a lengthy ordeal, comes across a platoon waiting in woodland just before battle.
Traveling through this world of war, yet there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright land to which I go.
So as you can see here, far from the close-up treatment of Hazel in the last clip, as soon as we get close to the singer here, we pan away and back to his audience of imperiled men, the camera focusing instead on the listeners. In each of the films here, the male performers do not appear to be the central focus of their own songs. In two of these films, Return of the King and Titanic, both songs take place over an action montage which involves battle, disaster and death. In Jaws, Sailor Quint, who sung Spanish ladies in mockery earlier in the film, now sings it softly accompanied by a whale song as the boat is attacked by a killer shark. What's fascinating in each of these examples is that no male characters wield folk song as a weapon or an agent of change. In fact, all these songs can be seen to emphasise the futility of the situation. What is in play now cannot be undone for any of them. As Roger Horrocks writes in his exploration of male myth and fantasy in popular culture, the more male, the greater the imaginative gulf separating him from his sources of primitive comfort, provoking him to create systems of ideas which can stand in the place of lost intimacy. When applied to these examples, where emotion seems only permissible by the performers being on the brink of disaster, it is, as Horrocks attests, an example of how damaging to these men these patriarchal motifs can be. But it may also shine an interesting light on what mainstream culture believes folk culture to be. I would argue that through the collectiveness of male emotion, men are considered the folk. By contrast, appealing to a lone man in each scenario may signify that women are out for themselves. So, I'd now like to examine films that deviate from these gender motifs, but do they really, or in subverting these motifs, are the same values being reinforced? I'll show you two examples in the form of stills, and then finish with a final clip. Firstly, the 2015 Far From the Madding Crowd. Farmer Bathsheba Everdeen is having a harvest supper with her workers. Joining them is her neighbour, Mr. Boldwood, who wants to marry her. But she's a bit uncertain about him. As in both Thomas Hardy's novel and the 1967 film, he's at the far end of the table from her. So she gets up to sing. He's doing the normal moony face that men do when women sing in films. But then, shock horror, he does something completely crazy. He joins in the love song, but not in a quiet, restrained way. Look, he's standing up. He is singing on his own in front of an audience who include other men. Oh no! Now he's doing harmonies. Mr. Boldwood, what are you doing? The patriarchy is watching. By making Mr. Boldwood participate so actively in this folk song, the domain of Bathsheba and female characters in general, he shows his cards far more unrestrainedly than the book or previous film, making not only his failure to obtain the woman he loves, but his downfall and disgrace inevitable. And to paraphrase Potter in Sorrel, like the men who fell to the sirens or the Lorelei, Boldwood's actions here might be interpreted as an example of male foolishness in allowing this seduction through singing to work. I want to talk in this next example about film genre. Yes, Claire, you might be saying to yourself, this is all well and good, but when there's a historical drama featuring women in long dresses, men are going to fall in love with them when they perform folk songs. So I'd like to show you what happens to folk song motifs when a female protagonist features in a generally more masculine genre. Mockingjay Part 1, a film in the Hunger Games series, is a dystopian thriller, and in this setting, Katniss Everdeen has reluctantly agreed to act as a propaganda tool, and she's being filmed, and she's acting all wooden and stiff. That is until they're having a break here, and a sympathetic mute male character asks her to sing for him. She does, everyone is moved, the birds all sing, literally. The man is happy. So far, so predictable, right? Except they're filming her singing. Cut to the rebel base later, and this man, Plutarch Heavensby, so the song's still playing now on screen, so it's a kind of continuation of the song. And he explains that he's digitally changed her lyrics to better fit with the rebel cause. And this man, he's hacked the broadcasting system so that Katniss's song now plays across all rebel districts. What happens after these men get involved? Does everyone become moved and heartened by Katniss's song and or fall in love with her, and that's the end of it? No, everyone fights and blows things up. I think this is a fascinating example about what happens to the female song motif when male characters get involved. But ultimately, over the course of the film, Katniss's song does adhere perfectly to the correct gender motif. Not only in the short term does she bolster the man she originally sang for, her song is the only thing that prevents her love interest, who's been brainwashed to try to kill her, from carrying out his aim, paving the way for their eventual marriage. Proof that you may take the girl out of a corset, but you can't as easily take the folk song motif out of the girl. But don't worry everyone, out of these 15 films there is a male character who actually engineers the singing of an emotional folk song all on his own. Okay, his love interest Rosemary has sung the exact same song already earlier in the film as we saw, but this is progress, right? And it gets better. He's not about to be eaten by a killer shark, go down on a ship, be blown up in some trenches, or killed by orcs. Hooray! So let's watch Anthony Riley in Wild Mountain Time and see what happens here, shall we?
And the flowers are richly blooming, the wild mountain thyme grows around the blooming heather.
They say if an Irishman dies while he's telling a story, you can rest assured he'll be back.
That wild mountain thyme all around the blooming heather. Will you go, I see go?
Yeah, you two, come on. Rosemary, come on.
I will down my love by the clear silver fountain, and I'll go in over with the flowers on the mountain. Will you go, I see go? If my true love should come, I will surely find a lover to the wild mountain thyme all around the blooming heather. Will you go, as he go?
I suspect if Anthony had been about to die horribly, he may have been allowed to sing that song on his own. But what's equally amazing about this example is that some of the people that you end up seeing in the crowd after Rosemary joins in the song are actually dead. That's right, she got involved and symbolically resurrected all their parents. So, to conclude, I hope I've been able to highlight some of the gendered cinematic tropes when it comes to folk song at the movies. But where do we go from here? I don't believe it's acceptable anymore for female performers of folk song to have untrustworthy, man-bewitching magic spell qualities attached to their singing with such frequency, or male characters who do the same thing to have their emotions so often hobbled by disengagement, disaster, and war. Recognising problematic gender motifs does not lessen my love of many of these films, although some are and remain legitimately awful. And I really want films to continue introducing traditional folk songs to millions of people who wouldn't find them otherwise. But I do think future filmmakers need to be careful not to perpetuate these motifs without considering their impact. When and if these motifs are used, I want filmmakers to be aware of what they're doing. And the fact remains that cinematic folk song needs to be careful it does not become an archaic gender trope, equivalent perhaps to a moustache-twirling villain or to a woman being tied to a rail track. Ensuring that filmmakers are mindful of folk song cinematic baggage, however, may be the first step towards change. Thank you.
So much, Claire, for a really sort of lively and interesting and, to me, you know, sort of original thing I'd never thought about before. So that's really great. Any questions for Claire? Yes.
Yeah, no, that was brilliant, thank you. When you were playing the clip from 1917, I was very struck by the fact that although it is supposedly a collective emotional experience, it is by no way a collective singing experience, which is probably highly unrealistic. So just wondering if there were, if that was common across these the male side of these clips, whether that was generally the case, or did people tend to join in?
Yeah, I think that's a good question that I haven't thought about. I think obviously with the Titanic, with the musicians on the Titanic, there are people together, but they're sort of acting as one unit. I think with a lot of these songs, it does seem to be a rather lonely pursuit, doesn't it? I think sometimes it's kind of, yeah, sort of holding up a mirror to other men of their own experiences rather than it being collective. I wouldn't necessarily off the top of my head be able to say it never happens, but I can't think of an example in which other men are singing a song with another man. Maybe Master and Commander, Spanish Ladies, but it's slightly different, and it didn't apply to this, the emotional impact of it, so, yeah.
Do you think that's something specific about folk song with these motifs? Would any song follow the same pattern, or is it specific to folk song?
I think that I mean, we all sort of come across this in kind of many areas, but I think there's a sort of stamp of authenticity that's kind of put on folk song, as opposed to perhaps maybe some other ones that might sort of people might assume they were more contrived. But there's a sort of a spontaneous authenticity. Now we know that there are big problems with thinking like that, and the notion of folk song and authenticity. You know, many studies have been done on it, but I think for mainstream popular culture, I think there is this sort of, you know, the purity of folk that I think is quite interesting when applied to film, because you're going to see it in its sort of most concentrated form of that, really. So I think looking at folk song is particularly interesting with regard to this, because it's sort of, as I say, more of a kind of concentrated version of what people think of an ordinary person singing songs that they're orally transmitted or of their community.
Yes.
You spoke of your aspirations for getting the film industry to accept that these tropes happen, and that maybe in the future this would be the case. How do you envisage that actually happening? Is it happening?
I haven't read much about anyone doing anything like this. It doesn't mean it isn't. Maybe you can tell me if there's anything that you think I should apply to this, any other readership. But I think really people just need to kind of be aware of what it is. Until I did this study, so I didn't do it trying to find something. I went into this and I analysed lots of trends. There were lots of other things that I covered that wasn't just the gender aspect of it, and I actually wasn't really expecting. I didn't go in thinking this is a thing, and it was just looking at all the films, analysing all the different tropes and how it worked and what was the song's purpose, what ended up happening, that it kind of came about that I found this out. So I do think that, and then you go and talk to people and they go, oh yes, I suppose, you know, people who I've spoken to have said, oh yes, I suppose I'd never thought of it quite like that before. So I think that there is a sort of, I think people just kind of need to be aware. I mean, I also would never say never use these motifs. I think sometimes they could be incredibly effective. But I think they need to be incredibly effective in the right way. If you're going to use it, you need to be playing with the expectation rather than just kind of going at it and sort of not thinking about it, because I do think that it can possibly contribute to something harmful. You know, I think the sort of emotional squeamishness when it comes to masculine performance, I think that's something that we need to move on from. And so I think really it's just kind of, oh, you know that thing that you're doing in that film. You know, here are the patterns. Maybe you want to think about that. I don't really have. I'm not sure I'm going to be storming Hollywood anytime soon with my manifesto. But I do think it's just. I think it's just helpful to go. Can you see this? Really.
I mean, that sort of raises the question, doesn't it? Did you come across any, or maybe you didn't know, but for literature of filmmakers where they, talked about their conscious kind of artistic and directional decisions of why I use that song there, and also on the flip side, we have, as you showed at the beginning, so much, we've got kind of fan-based type websites for different films which want to identify all the minutiae and the bloopers and all the rest of it and that inside knowledge, but also just on YouTube, so many comments. So is it hitting the audience, do you think, even subliminally? Is there an awareness of that? So just first of all, the filmmakers, and then what do audience members pick up on the sorts of things that you're seeing?
From everything I read, I didn't see any sort of filmmakers alluding to this. It's quite hard to find anything, that specifically focuses on folk song. People talk, filmmakers and composers. I looked at Ennio Morricone, who'd obviously written loads of scores for films, and he was talking about how you can use folk song in forms of protest, that it kind of worked in so many ways with the kind of emotional heft that a folk song can do. Unlike another form, because he'd done such a lot of film scores, so he had things to say about folk song. But then you have people like James Cameron with Titanic, and one of his, I read that one of his things that he won't put the song in a film because he doesn't like the sort of using it as a device. And when I read that, I was like, you did, in my and it's one of the things that people talk about all the time with Titanic. And do you remember a few years ago in COVID when there was that footage of the people playing the music in the abandoned supermarket next to the loo rolls wearing life jackets? There are ways, and I would maintain that it's used as a song in this. I mean, you might disagree, but I think it's not a piece of music, it's a song. So it's things like that, really. And filmmakers, film writers themselves have been talking about, sort of using film to kind of right the wrongs of reality and, using it like that. So I think there probably is an element of that, but I haven't looked at anything specifically where a director has said, this is what I did in that.
Catherine.
Thanks, Julie. Thank you, Claire. That was really fascinating. I hadn't really thought about this before, but of course now I'm thinking about it a lot. I'm just thinking, I've got a comment and a question. My comment is, there's a sort of subgenre of films that are called after folk songs, including Wild Mind Time There, and one that comes to my mind is The Wind That Shakes the Barley, really a great film, a great Irish film. But the question is, do you think, and it seems certainly to be the case with Wild Mind Time, what a horrendously bad film that is.
It's so funny.
So bad. But the question is, are these songs being used to fill an emotional gap that's not really conveyed in the film properly by the story or by the acting? Are they kind of a sort of a lazy shorthand? Oh, here's a song that's kind of conveys a lot of sad emotion or whatever, loss and things, and we'll just plonk that in there, and that'll make the whole film seem a lot better.
I think probably yes, but I think sound in cinema is used like that anyway. If you had a sort of montage with music or a death scene, I think there are ways in which sound does contribute it, and I wouldn't particularly say as a motif. I love that folk songs are in films. I think it does. Well, I think it does more good than harm by the fact that it's getting out there to people, and but yeah, perhaps Wild Round Time is a really good example of being sledgehammered something. The newest Far From the Madding Crowd, that's used to absolutely sledgehammer us over the head with with what's going on, which is unnecessary. But you know, sometimes it can be done amazingly. I think it depends. If the film was bad, it would probably be might not be done well, and then if the film was good, it might be done better, I suppose.
Thank you. We're almost running out of time, and I can see lots of hands. I think there were 2 over there, and then if they could be fairly quick, then I think we need to, sorry folks over here, draw this part of the session to a close. But we'll just have these 2 last questions.
Yeah, I wonder if you notice any variation between the different subgenres of folk music, you know, Irish, Scottish, American, English, in the way that these tropes work. I was just thinking that in the film Sinners,
I haven't seen it yet, and everyone keeps telling me that. Yeah, but you're right. Yeah.
Well, no, maybe I shouldn't tell you that.
But it's one I need to add. Yeah.
Basically, blues music and Irish music and Wild Martin Town, although of course it's not actually an Irish song, but never mind. Blues music and Irish music have very, very, very different resonances. And the resonance of blues music is very positive and collective and so on. Irish music less so. So I wonder if you've seen any sort of patterns like that.
I think perhaps there's not quite enough data on each. I forgot about Wild Mountain Time. That's a really good example. And if anyone's got any other examples that I haven't seen, or because you've only seen what you've seen, haven't you? So I forgot completely about Wild Mountain Time. I've lost my. Sorry. What were you saying? Oh yes, blues and different music. I haven't looked enough about particular what Scottish music does, what Irish music does, because of this kind of. I haven't got quite enough data. However, I really haven't seen much deviation from anything. I mean, you know, one of my examples is 12 Years a Slave, where a enslaved plantation worker is singing, and it gives heart to the protagonist. You know, when he joins in the song with the women, and it gives him heart. And I think that's a very similar example to some of the other examples that are more of the kind of Celtic or English tradition. So I haven't noticed anything that's particularly deep. I mean, it seems fairly strong and fairly consistent to me. But it would be interesting to open it out to other things. And also another thing I would say is that I didn't use TV programs because of the episodic nature. You don't have to use those motifs. It's just, you know, with film you have to signpost things very quickly and very unmistakably because you've got a narrative arc to fulfill. So I would just say that that's something else that's interesting. There may be some deviations with the motifs in TV.
I'm going to use chair's prerogative here because we are slightly running out of time. John, can I get you to ask your question in a tea break afterwards rather than now, if that's okay? But thank you again so much for a fascinating talk. Thank you so much. So I'd love to welcome now Hugh Miller, please, onto the platform here, this virtual platform. Why are there so few witches in traditional song? Hugh, welcome. Thank you for being here. So you can read Hugh's illustrious background here on the programme, but suffice it to say he's bringing his interests as an independent researcher now into this presentation. So Hugh, tell us, is there an answer to this question that you set yourself?
Right. Well, first of all, I need to say that witches can be and were male as well as female, but overwhelmingly people who were accused of witchcraft in the early modern period were women, and in our modern folklore, witches are overwhelmingly reckoned as women. So I think it's acceptable to talk about this in this setting. And the reason I'm here to talk about it is that I'm in a group that meets every month to talk about ballads for a while. And we decided we'd look at supernatural themes. And I thought, well, I'll bring some witch songs on. I know a couple, and I'm sure I can find some more. And I looked, and I couldn't find. Sorry, but... Try the other way. And I couldn't find any more. And that that struck me as being odd, because witches are so much part of our current folklore. I mean, outside circles like this, everybody knows about witches, and witches can be characterised in well-established ways. You will all have understood this cartoon straight away without any explanation at all. We have a well-established iconography of witches. Witches are young and attractive with long hair and pointy hats, flying on goats or broomsticks in heels. Or they're old and ugly with pointy hats and possibly green skin. And even for children, pointy hats and broomsticks and flying are enough to identify witches. So, they're pervasive in modern folklore. Why aren't they there in the traditional songs? Well, first of all, I'm going to try and establish that they aren't there in the traditional songs. I'll try and give you some evidence for that. And then I'll suggest a few possible reasons. Just to make the point, if you look on TikTok, there are lots of videos to tell you how to make a witch bottle. Some of them wouldn't work because they don't like to put urine in, and you can't have a witch bottle without urine. There's so much of it there. Modern songwriters in the folk field quote Isabel Geddes. Both Maddie Pryor and Faye Hild have written songs quoting from Isabel Geddes' confession as a Scottish witch. So, where are they in the tradition? Well, David Buchan wrote a piece on the witch ballads, which is reprinted in the 2013 collection of his stuff. He identified these 5 and a few others which had sort of passing references. 2 of those, well, they're characters that have been bewitched, have been turned into some kind of alternative person or monster, but there's not much really about the witch bit. The point of the story is, the unwitching. So that leaves you with Willie's Lady Icencrouse and the Lady Worm. Also, if you look at the sources, they're nearly all from Mrs. Brown. If it wasn't for Anna Gordon, we'd have hardly any witch ballads at all, even the few that we've got. And if you look in Bronson, they don't appear, or if they do appear, it's with a tune from Mrs. Brown. So Bronson wasn't aware of them, going through the tradition up till the 1960s at all. So we've got this very narrow source and no dissemination, as the example we talked about earlier. And even then, I don't think these 2 are witch songs. These are about a woman who waves a wand or blows a horn and turns a human into something else. An ugly worm, a lady worm, a mackerel of the sea. It's nothing to do with early modern witchcraft accusations and how people saw witchcraft working back in the days when people were really concerned about that. These are fantasy characters like giants or like dragons. The only one which really does seem to be to do with witchcraft is Willie's Lady. And you've got a spell which interferes with somebody's health. The woman can't give birth. You consult with somebody outside, a cunning person who gives you an idea about how to find out about the spell. The spell turns out to be to do with manipulation of clothes and body parts and lodging a familiar animal in the house. If you get rid of that, the person is unspelled and things come to a happy ending. And that's a story which fits very well with early modern accounts, 16th and 17th century accounts of witchcraft and witchcraft accusations. So that's a witch ballad, but that's it. And I was pleased to find when I went back and looked at Buchan that he agreed. Only in Willie's Lady did the actual details of the witchcraft spell attain any prominence. So So that's 1 out of 300 plus in a child. I did a bit of further searching. If you look at the Penguin Book of English Folk Songs, which was supposed to be picking up on stuff which wasn't current in the revival, and the New Penguin Book, which picks up on stuff which is popular within the tradition at large, so that gives you fairly good coverage. Couldn't find any which-related songs there. And if you look at the broadsides, the Bodleian collection isn't available online, but the University of California one, you've got 10,000 songs. I found 5 with which in the title. I didn't go through the text of the other 10,000 to see if there were others, but the starting point. 3 of those are straightforward accounts of witch trials. Condemnation of 3 notorious witches, convict and sentence to death for bewitching persons, destroying ships, etc. And that's the kind of newspaper stuff that you expect from broadsides. And in fact, there's a lot of printed stuff, cheap printed stuff about witch trials, witch confessions, the dreadful things that witches did, but it's all prose in leaflets and so on. It's not in songs. That's 3. The 4th I found was My Nurse Was a Witch, or The Merry Night Wench. This is a young woman who's supposed to be looking after a child, and she goes out to get drunk and have a good time instead. And the rest of the song is about associated dossers and skivers in other trades. All of them men, I think, certainly most of them men. So here, this is not a demonic witch, this is just a gendered insult. Oh, she's a little witch, you know. And it's actually a bit odd that this is 1630. This is a time when it wasn't uncommon to hang women for killing other people by witchcraft, but you could still use it as a rather trivial insult. The 5th one I found does fit with the real history. Strange news from the Blue Boar in Holborn. Girl falls ill. She and her friend consult with a cunning person who tells them how to make a witch bottle with urine and something in the bottle, buries in the dunghill. The witch is unable to pass urine and blows up and eventually explodes, so everything ends happily, except for the witch. And that's, again, a realistic, in a sense, early modern story. That would make sense in the period involved. I also looked at the 100 top broadside ballads, which is actually 120 songs which are amongst the greatest hits of their age. No witch songs. So that's not good scholarly research. I've not gone through the archives, and I'm sure there are people here who know, well, I know there are people here who know a lot more about that than I do, and probably do know some other witch songs, and I'd be pleased to hear about them. But if they were at all common, they would have shown up in that. And if you look at these topics, you'll all know songs about those. And why have we got lots of songs about those in particular? Ghosts and other supernatural visitors. I mean, that's occult and so on. Why have we got lots of ghost stories and no witch stories? Well, I've got 3 suggested explanations. The first one is that, at least in England, there wasn't a lot going on. I had a friend who was going through the assize records for the home circuit, the southeast of England, which is the place we've got really good assize records, and he separated out all the witchcraft cases for me, and I won't go into details about that, but we found 332 prosecutions. Quite a lot were murder by witchcraft. Somebody had cast a spell on somebody and they died, and about half of those cases, the person was found guilty, and in almost all cases they were hung. Witches weren't burnt in England, they were hung. And there were other things. That's 332 cases in about 80 years for the records. varies a bit from county to county. So that's about 5 a year of murder and other charges, and 1 or 2 a year hangings in the whole of the southeast of England. And when we roughly counted the total number of assize cases, witchcraft cases were somewhere in the region of 1.5%. So not a lot going on. There would have been a lot going on presumably at a lower level. Assize cases are serious cases, so there would have been lots of squabbles and people being run out of town and accusations and so on. But when it comes to murder or killing livestock or destroying property or so on, not many cases. So that's one thing. Second thing is that witches don't give you very good story value. One of the things which were very noticeable in the assize cases was that people who were killed by witchcraft, supposedly, were killed very slowly. They were bewitched in April and they languished until September, and then they died, presumably of some unidentified illness which then got blamed on the witch. So you don't have the straightforward action that you get in the classic ballads. This happens and then this happens and this happens. There was also apparently quite a lot of background. There were previous cases of people being ill, of livestock being injured or killed and so on. So there was a whole sort of backstory which led to a case where somebody was actually then given a serious accusation. And the realistic story structure, which is somebody is bewitched, often you consult with an expert, find a counterspell, and either you foil the witch and it ends happily, or you don't, and somebody dies or whatever it doesn't. That's a good early modern witch story. It's all a bit complicated. Willie's Lady does that, but I think there are two versions in Child, which are both essentially differently edited versions from Mrs. Brown. 78 verses or 88 verses, which is a bit long for a ballad anyway. And the Blue Boar broadside does a good job of that, but again, that's classic, very long broadside. So, and if you compare that with Ice and Gross and the Lady Worm, where you've got a conflict, sexual conflict or a family conflict, somebody waves a wand and transforms somebody into a monster, or maybe untransforms them at the end. I mean, that's a good ballad story. Straightforward action, this leads to this, this leads to this, this leads to that. And others. Aristocratic sex scandal leads to bloodbath. Yeah, you know what that one is. And legendary outlaw uses trickery to rescue 3 squires. They're good ballad stories. And the witch stories don't seem to fit that pattern so well. The third thing is when this happened and when our songs come from. The witch centuries in England, at least, are the 16th and 17th century. After that, or even by the end of the 17th century, witchcraft accusations were dying away, people weren't being convicted, and so on. And the 1736 Witchcraft Act actually abolished witchcraft. You could still be prosecuted for being a witch, but that wasn't because you had demonic power, it was because you were fooling people, you were claiming to have witchcraft power in order to threaten them, defraud them, harass them, or whatever. Magic officially no longer existed after 1736. In the general population, magic still did exist, and there was still quite a lot, both positive and negative magic. You've got cunning folk doing good as well as witches doing bad. But then, that's the 17th century, well, that's the 18th century. Quite a lot of our songs, actually were old songs, were composed in the 19th century. Even if they're older than that, if they came through an oral tradition, they've got to come through a 19th century filter. And by the time you get to the 19th century, witchcraft is not a big issue, I don't think. people have got other things to think about, like the press gang, like the relationship between landowners and poachers, like transportation. And we have songs about those in our tradition as old songs. This has just faded out a bit, I think. That's backed up a little bit by a study by Julia Phillips. She went through 19th century newspapers looking for stories about witches, and that they're there. There's a fair few of them, but looking at what she's got, it seemed to me that there are three themes there. One is mocking stories, a quaint survival amongst gullible peasants. So, this is a story which enables you to laugh at the people out in the countryside. There are also stories which follow from the 1736 Act, which is supposed witches doing fraudulent things, exploiting people and so on, and being prosecuted for that. But conversely, there are also court cases where people have attacked supposed witches because they thought they'd been bewitched, and they were punishing them, there were vigilante actions and so on. And also a number of cases where people were trying to scratch witches, because if you can draw blood from a witch, they lose their power over you. So that belief was still there and still active in the 19th century. Right, I just sort of follow on from that. I thought I'd contrast it with folk tales, and I did another quick and easy search through Catherine Briggs' 4 volumes, and she's got a section on witches with 118 stories. And what you've got there, witches are women. They do harm to household or livestock more than killing people or making them ill. Stealing milk is by magic is quite a thing. There's also quite a lot of transformation into other species, hares particularly, but lots of others. And another very prominent theme is conflict between witches and good magic performers, wise people, cunning folk who find ways of unspelling people and so on. And there's 1 or 2 mentions of the devil, covens and flying. I think 1 mention of broomsticks. Not much about familiars, which is interesting, because familiars were quite a big issue in the 16th to 17th century as evidence of witchy activity. Couldn't find anything at all about pointy hats. Where pointy hats came from is a mystery, I think. So, I was also encouraged to go back to Buchan again. Quotidian magic is a pervasive concern of the witch legends. And in the legends, there's metamorphosing, which is what I've just said. This difference between ballads and legends of the same regional tradition with ostensibly the same subject matter leads to interesting speculation about generic function. And I think that's a much wider issue. I think there are quite big differences between folk tales and folk songs in all frameworks and topics and so on. But that's another project. So my 3 suggested explanations for the absence of witch ballads is, well, there wasn't a lot of witchcraft going on. What there was, the stories that came out of that didn't fit making into songs very well, and historically there was a fading of interest in witchcraft, though of course historically we've now got a big renewal of interest in witchcraft. I think for me, my phone has just told me my 20 minutes are up. I think for me the middle one is the best explanation, because there clearly was awareness and interest in witchcraft in the 19th century, but the contrast between the folk tales and the folk songs I think fits with the idea that witch stories are not good for songs. So I'm going to be writing this up in more detail with proper references and so on my blog. The address down there is at the bottom, Miller site WordPress. But I'd be interested to hear any comments and questions you've got now.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So fascinating musings there. need to come to you first because I cut you short in the last session, so you go first and then we'll have the two over here.
This reinforces some of the things you say.
Sorry, I'm rather deaf, so I'll have to come
I
up.
want to say that in the last third of the 19th century, pantomime changes its character, and often pantomimes have witches in them, so it's your folk tales coming back into stage performance and songs being to sing. And from that source, there are several songs which could have been adopted by oral tradition, maybe perhaps were not. There is, of course, the Pride of the Lancashire Witches, whose beauty every bosom enriches, their pretty blue something about their pretty blue eyes, the Pride of the Lancashire Witches. That's about the Pendlebury Witches, and which persist, the legend of which became plays and books and novels and all sorts of things in the 19th century. But Pendlebury Witches were the women of Lancashire, who were obviously more beautiful than any other woman on the planet. The other song you might look for is Old Mother Gone, which is a song to do with witches, which came from the pantos in the 1870s and was picked up by some traditional singers.
And did they have pointy hats in the pantos?
There's no pictures in 19th century papers, and they don't describe them.
That's an interesting source, and of course, witches are still in panto. I took my grandchildren to panto this winter, and there were witches in that still.
Whether you would know.
A couple of questions over here.
Thank you. That was really interesting. Thank you. I was wondering if you'd looked into American songs at all, and as a potential contrast point, because it struck me that in the U.S., the Salem witch trials are such a big kind of historical folkloric reference point. So, like, the witch song I know is about the Salem witch trials. Susanna Martin was a witch who died in Amesbury. I don't actually know how old it is, but that I thought maybe if in England there aren't such famous kind of founding moment witch trials, that might be another potential.
We've got a couple of witch panics, but the Salem one is really famous. And my comments, I guess, are mainly about English and Scottish music. Child obviously went further than that, but Bronson only picked up on Child. You'd think that maybe Bronson could have found the kind of stuff that you were talking about, but of course that wasn't his focus.
Yeah, I just thought it might be an interesting comparative point for you if you could look at other English language traditions that might have more that could reinforce your point.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sue, that's a question.
I just wondered, can we not explain the prevalence or demise of witchcraft? Witchcraft is really set against religion. So at the time when you had, in the early modern period, religion being very strong, Protestantism, Presbyterianism, Puritanism, then witchcraft comes to the fore as something in opposition, that the religious people set in opposition. And now with the demise of religion, it's less so. And in fact now we've got the neo-pagans embracing their witchiness.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true of the modern revival, but early modern witchcraft was Christian. I mean, it was very much to do with the devil, and a lot of the rituals were to do with reversing Christian rituals and so on. The idea that it was an alternative pagan religion, I think, has been...
No, I wasn't saying that. I was saying it's set up, it becomes the big monster during big periods of Christian revivalism. It's not a monster now because we're less religious.
Yeah, and the early modern period, because we had lots of Christian conflict. We didn't burn witches, but Christians burnt other Christians for being the wrong kind of Christian at that time. So there's a lot of pressure there.
Wow, hands of coffee envelopes. So these, okay, 1, 2, and 3, and I think that's all we have time for. So, Catherine, please.
Yes, thank you. That was very interesting. This may be too late, really, for your study, but Bridget Cleary was the last woman to be burnt in Ireland, which 1895 by her husband and some of her family. And there's at least one ballad written at the time of that, but there's been a lot more songs written about her subsequently like lamenting her and, kind of restoring her character and all that kind of thing. Yeah, there is at least one, possibly two, once our ballads at the time. But that, as I said, it's quite late, it's 1895, so.
Yeah.
Doesn't that also indicate, and something that's cropped up in my mind, sorry, it's about, we haven't got such a strong tradition, or it's not well documented, of local song making, and the legends are very much about, because they're set in, with an element of truth, and they're set in a time and a place that is specific, and the sort of songs you would get there are sort of more generic, not tied to a particular place. So just to put in my two kind of there. Right, yes.
Hi, thank you, that was really interesting, and I was really interested in particular the bit about the structure of songs and what works as a song and what wouldn't. And I was just thinking about the languishing aspect of it, and it put me in mind of Barbara Allen and versions of Barbara Allen where he languishes and then they both die. And then obviously in many versions there are those the rose and the briar growing out of the graves and twining, which is quite sympathetic magic, if you like. So what would you say about the idea of Barbara possibly being a witch song?
I don't know. I mean, Barbara Allen is quite malevolent in some of the versions. I mean, there's an issue about died for love. It depends whether you believe that people are likely to die for love, or do they need to be bewitched before that would happen? It's a good question.
Brian, I think, yeah. Thank you.
There's a version of the Broomfield Hill in which the young woman outwits the young man by casting a stone into keep him asleep.
Yeah,
in one of the versions she gets advice from somebody who's described as a witch woman in order to cast the spell.
That's good.
But the witch woman in that strikes me much more as a wise woman rather than a witch woman. That got me wondering, she's a goodie. That just got me wondering whether it'd be worth having a similar search for wise women or whether that might be just a one-off.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I think I ought to go around the room with a piece of paper.
We've got a tea break fairly shortly,
get
so
some
we can
good
pick up
new
on
leads.
this.
Yeah, thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much again to Hugh. And without further ado, I would very like to warmly welcome Peter, who has already been introduced, sort of indirectly today, but obviously fresh from the publication of his book, which I hope this talk will tell us a little bit more about.
I think it will
shedding light on. But yes, his main qualification, of course, for studying and Gilchrist is that he's also a Lancastrian, as she was as well. So he's very much that sort of area of the country. So over to you. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you, Julia. I appreciate that introduction. I'm Geddes Gilchrist. Let us remember the women. Good afternoon. I'm especially pleased to be here this afternoon to present this paper about Anne Gilchrist, and the title of my presentation is a little subtle reference to the conference theme, as Let Us Remember was an article by Anne Gilchrist in the EDS magazine of July-August 1942. She was 78 years old at that time, and the article gave readers some background to the name that had been a feature of the folk song and dance journals over the past 36 years. With an incredible gift for memory and a seemingly endless knowledge of the history of English and Scottish tunes, she had by this time become a beacon of the folk song and dance movement. She was a remarkable woman, self-effacing, independent and well respected amongst her peers. She once told a story about one of her Sussex singers whose husband sang the Lost Lady Fan when he spotted her coming home from market, and today feels a little like Anne Gilchrist has been brought home to Manchester and honoured with 2 presentations, and I've had quite a few favourable and appreciative comments about the work we've done on her over the last few years, which I appreciate. She was born to Scottish parents in 1863, about 3 miles from here, where we are today, and it's a 5-minute walk from the old Free Trade Hall, which is now the Radisson Edwardian Hotel, where the Baron and the Dove were... Oh, wrong one. I'm with it wrong way round. With a buried at the door, one of the songs she collected from her great uncle Archibald Prentice in September 1900 was passed on by him to a bass comic vocalist in Manchester, who in turn had great success at the Monday popular concerts in the old Free Trade Hall more than 50 years ago. And it's interesting to note that on the bottom stave, she's begun to note some variants to the same song her father sung to her. Now, Aunt once said that my interest in folk song began while I was still illiterate, which some collectors seem to think an advantage in a folk singer. And that is because her mother, who had a charming and sympathetic voice, often sang to her when she was a young child. There were other female influences too. Harriet Hartley, a jolly Manchester mill girl, enlivened her nursery on Saturday afternoons with songs such as The Four Jolly Fishermen and Bingo. And Elizabeth Piercy, a young domestic nurse from Flint, taught Anne a number of Welsh folk songs, and although she did not understand them, she recited them parrot fashion to the amusement of Elizabeth's friends. Anne was educated here in Manchester, both at a secondary and a tertiary level. She studied harmony and composition, passed her Royal Academy of Music exams, and was awarded a gold medal in a singing competition for those students who had achieved the best exam results. That was in 1886, and she was 22 years old. She always regarded herself as a singer rather than a pianist, although she did both for over 80 years. And she was raised in a liberal Scots Presbyterian family, along with her three brothers and 4 sisters. There's a creative energy in the household for painting and music, and a bit of a bohemian spirit when it came to the outdoors, where they often walked, sailed and fished together. And I find this photograph really quite interesting. They are enjoying themselves. I'm not honest. But you can see that they've created their own flag, and it's an elephant, and on the back of the elephant there's a bee upside down, and it's also got 2 little wings on, so it's almost like the Manchester bee on the top of an elephant. And on the bottom of the flag there are letters BYOP. Now this was in the days before youth opportunities programmes, but I just thought it might be interesting to see if there's any idea what BYOP might be.
Bring your own thought.
Sorry?
Bring your own thought.
Well, you're not far off, and it's very applicable for today's conference because it's bring your own picnic. That's the kind of family word. In the latter years of the 19th century, the Gilchrist family moved from Manchester to Southport, and it was a time when Anne volunteered her services at the Southport Orphanage for Girls and the St George's Presbyterian Church, where she helped organise a number of themed evenings designed for social pleasure and educational improvement, and she often lectured on them herself. One such evening was the 17th of January 1907, and her chosen topic was all ballads and some of their characteristics. And the evening contained a direct reference to the Folk Song Society and complimented Cecil Sharp, one of 3 such occasions she did in that year, by posing the following question: is the folk song dead? And providing the following answer: no. It has been hibernating during the last generation or 2 perhaps, but I see no reason why under the returning warmth of sympathy and appreciation it should not revive. And the Folk Song Society, to which I have the honour to belong, is doing most valuable work. One collector, Mr. Cecil Sharp, has, within the last 3 or 4 years, taken down 1,200 traditional songs from the lips of the people, many of extreme beauty. Other collectors, including myself, have recovered many old songs, opening up the most interesting suggestions for the folklorist and historian. Now, Anne had been a member of the Folk Song Society for almost 2 years at this point, and since 1906, a member of the journal's editorial board. She became a pioneer of folk song archaeology at a time when social attitudes and perceptions of women were much different than now. The following comment about the American scholar Annabel Moniston Buchanan and Anne Gilchrist, who were known to each other through correspondence, helps contextualise that period and prompts consideration of the barriers, visible, invisible, geographical or social, that prevailed at the time, with Gilchrist and Buchanan both journeyed into the countryside, relishing a chance to experience a sense of adventure which was seldom available to women in their societies. And this is Anne and her 4 sisters, stood behind her mother and her sister-in-law. It suggests a natural bonhomie to with the spirit of adventure, and I call it Sisters Unlimited. She met Lucy Broadwood, editor of the Journal of the Folksong Society at this time, and it was a significant occasion. They became close friends. Lucy encouraged Anne to write notes about the songs she collected, and they worked well together in a professional and scholarly manner over a long period of time on the editorial board of the journal. About them, Margaret Dean Smith wrote, "Their difference of temperament and approach stand out. The one, Anne Gilchrist, matter of fact, shrewdly concerned with life as it is lived, characterised by the objective precision that brought her recognition as a serious archaeologist and botanist. The other, Lucy Broadwood, erudite, attracted to Christian mysticism and medieval allegory. Together they were harmoniously complementary. Together they raised the Journal of the Folksong Society to a thing of knowledge and value." Gilchrist herself recalled, with Lucy Broadwood, my associations were closest of all. I do not remember that we ever disagreed on matters of principle or policy during the long years of association on the editorial board of the journal. Now in 1915, it was crisis time for the journal, as Frederick Keel, then editor, was amongst a number of British civilians detained in Germany at the beginning of the war. And Lucy Broadwood asked Anne Gilchrist for help in preparing... Lucy Broadwood asked Anne Gilchrist to help prepare a journal for that year, and she willingly assented and wrote, "The journal was duly issued in spite of difficulties, and she sent a copy of it to Frederick Keel in his captivity, with what reassuring news of how the journal and its interests were carrying on at home. The war overshadowed everything though. And when Anne wrote to Lucy Broadwood in the autumn of 1914, she did so with a sense of perspective. Just now, when one is sick with anxiety, it seems hard, even callous, to be undertaking folk song work. But it may really be a useful distraction in keeping one's thoughts from dwelling incessantly on the subject. I hope you may find it so, for your personal anxieties, I know, are greater than mine, and you have already suffered sad losses amongst your friends." Frank Howard described them as the greatest scholars of the movement and representatives of that stalwart class of maiden aunts of independent means to which English social and cultural life owes more than it has ever acknowledged. I think if somebody writes something like that about somebody, it's really meaningful. When writing to Lucy Broadwood, Anne adopted the established etiquette of the day, but she also liked writing poetry and riddles, and on the 14th of October 1913 she started her letter in a somewhat different way, and one which demonstrated their trustful and comfortable friendship. "My dear Concher," the letter opened, and proceeded with, "I penetrated into the depths of a primeval pathological forest, thinking that I was the very first of its shades to be the explorist, and there in the very middle was a tree, and neatly cut upon it the initials LEB. It's friendly, it's familiar, perhaps a little mythical and mysterious, almost folklore, but it is about Anne Gilchrist acknowledging the extent of Lucy Broadwood's knowledge. The next paragraph in the letter explained how happy Anne Gilchrist was when she realised that the song Rolling Down Wapping was one that Lucy was not familiar with, hence the mysteriously worded accolade. In 1928, Lucy Broadwood retired as the editor of the journal. Anne wrote about Lucy's unflagging service and skillful management of a growing number of collectors, often holding individual and divergent views as to the essential character and meaning of folk song. On a more personal note, she wrote, "Any differences of opinion which might occur between her in her editorial capacity and myself never needed composing. They never altered friendship during the 22 years in which we have worked together in the happiest of relations." It was a candid assessment, reflective of their years of friendship and association with the journal and their proficient stewardship of it. Between 1906 and 1948, Anne was a prolific researcher and writer, and there are more than 100 articles printed in the journals that bear her name, either as sole trader, sole author, or one of a number of contributors. As a keen reader and subscriber of the Choir and Musical Journal, she also wrote 34 articles and 5 book reviews for that publication between 1917 and 1936, and many of those articles contain references to the songs she collected. In the early part of the 20th century, Anne collected songs in Southport, Blackham in Sussex, Sunderland Point near Lancaster, and Barben in Casterton, 2 former Westmoreland villages. When considered individually, they represent a relatively small geographical area, and apart from Blackham, are all in the northwest of England. This is noteworthy though, for at a time when almost all the folk song collectors were scouring the southern counties, Anne Gilchrist and her other good friend Frank Kidson were the only ones interested in the north, and it was Anne alone who concentrated on the northwest, and in particular Lancashire. It is therefore a significant collection. As opportunity, Anne wrote singing games, Lancashire rush carts and Morris tunes, pace egging and other custom songs, sailors' shanties, the first ever to be printed in the journal, ballads, carols, cumulative, nursery and cradle songs were all fish for my net. And a significant number were collected from female singers. In Barben and Casterton, 41% of 17 songs collected came from female singers. In Blackham it was 54% of 39 songs. In Southport, a little different, only 30% of 23 songs collected came from a female voice. This, though, is due to the large number of songs collected there by William Bolt. In Sunderland Point, 77% of 39 songs collected came from a female singer. For ease of analysis, I've not included children's songs in that summation. But in total, 55 songs collected by Anne Gilchrist came from female singers. Mrs. Carlyle of Barben was 88 years old when she met Anne Gilchrist. She was her oldest singer and an age, dame of spirit and character. Mrs. Carlyle was impressed to see Anne Gilchrist note down both the words and the tune of her songs and remarked, "Isn't she clever?" And when she sang Admiral Hodier's Ghost, an 11-verse ballad, Anne noted, "And although the old lady started off bravely, her voice soon tired and she lapsed into recitation, seeming to find an aid to memory in the rhythmical pleating of her apron, or in tracing with her finger each imaginary line of the verse on a blank card held in her hand." In contrast, on a visit to the Southport Orphanage for Girls in 1915, a young Lancashire workhouse girl by the name of Margaret sang "There Was a Lady Dressed in Green," described by Anne as a degraded form of the cruel mother, in which she danced as a ring game to a gay lilt delightfully inappropriate to its tragedy. Whilst at the orphanage, she also noted, "My mother has killed me, and my coffin shall be black." 2 specimens of tragic traditional verse handed down continuously from one generation of children to another, she commented. Now that makes a very interesting comparison to the songs collected from her 2 young female singers in Blackham, the 14-year-old Florrie Coomer, who sang "The Squire and the Milkmaid," and the young Ethel Ford, who sang "The Cottage in the Wood and the Farmer's Boy." And then there was Mrs. Bowker of Sunderland Point near Lancaster. About her, Anne wrote, "She sang a number of old songs, such as the curious 16th century ballad of a child bridegroom, my bonny lad is young but he's growing, and the harrowing ballad of the cruel ship's carpenter, and the favourite ditty of the intrepid serving lass with her box upon her head who killed the young highwayman in self-defence and then was rather afraid of the consequences till she was wooed and married by a wealthy gentleman who admired her for taking her own part so courageously, and the song of My Johnny, who was a shoemaker but now has gone to sea, and the weird ballad of the unquiet grave, whose tenant complains of being disturbed by the tears of his sweetheart, who was mourned above it for a 12-month and a day. Now, Mrs. Bowker, wife of James Bowker the farmer, would have been 50 years old when she sang the lion's share of songs collected by Anne at Sunderland Point. An intriguing example of a song collected from Mrs. Bowker in July 1909 is The Little Gypsy Girl. Here are the words at the side of this grocery bill, along with some of Mrs. Bowker's 17 Come Sunday. I like this not only for its nostalgic value, but for what appears to be a spontaneous opportunity and leaves a question as to who may have had the pencil and the paper in the first place unanswered. Anne Gilchrist was appointed as the Vice President of the Folk Song Society in 1929, elected a Fellow of the Society of Antiquaries in 1935, was awarded a gold badge of the English Folk Dance and Song Society in 1939, and received an OBE for services to folk music in 1948. She was an enthusiastic song collector, made little in the way of fur copies, and left very little detail of her collecting adventures. But about the process of song collecting, she did write this. A very charming bond of sympathy and equality is thus created between singer and collector. And though the process of collecting calls for tact, patience, and perseverance under various difficulties, we generally find ourselves in cordial agreement as regards the dictum with which such sittings usually conclude, that there are no songs like the old ones, and they do sing such rubbishy things nowadays. I'm Geddes Gilchrist, folk song collector, folk song scholar. Thank you.
So much to Peter for that inspiring introduction, and I'm sure there's lots more anecdotes and quotations in the book which will be fascinating to read. I think it's just great. I love the way that Anne also did collect from children and you know, the author. Any questions for Peter? We're just going to go away and look it up in the book.
Tea time.
Did she, I mean, from what you said there, was it, I mean, well, did she have a very sort of, you know, strong sense of what she was looking for? Because I get the impression she was quite sort of a bit more open in her definitions, maybe, than some of the other collectors.
She was quite open, and I think also we have to realise that Frank Kidson had a certain hand in what she did. And I think Frank Kidson really took her under his wing and point her in the right direction. But once let loose from that initial guidance, she would, as a quote says, you know, sweep up anything really, anything that would come her way. If she thought, you know, if it was there, she'd note it down. So that's why her collection is quite broad in terms of not only the geographical nature of where she's collected the songs from and who she's collected the songs from, but also in Morris tunes and dance tunes and you know, music as well from the Georgian and Edwardian periods.
Anyone?
Well, I suppose following up on that, I guess we don't know what she didn't collect, because am I right in thinking that basically, you know, that she annotated lots of her songs, you know, learnt from her mother or whatever. But I think there were not diaries, for instance, that would, or maybe in articles, did she ever sort of say this is what a folk song is, or you know, I'm just thinking, you know, the Fords and the Coopers may have sung all sorts of musical stuff that she didn't bother to note down and didn't record the fact that she hadn't recorded them, if you know what I mean.
Well, it's hard to know what she did.
Well, quite, yes.
Note down, because she didn't say, I've not noted down a certain number of songs because I didn't think they were of any value. Songs she collected in Blackham, she was a little unsure that they had any antiquarian value, but she sent them along to the editorial committee anyway because they were worth hanging comments upon. So they had some use, even though she perhaps thought they're not the real folk songs I'm perhaps hoping to find. But in contrast, collecting songs in Sunderland Point and in Southport, she did find songs that she thought were real, folk songs that had some value. Particularly Southport, where the first sea shanties were collected and printed in the journal. So it's a little bit of both, I think, really, of those issues. But you're right about the other thing. She left nothing in the way of real commentary of what she did and where she went to do it and who she met. And that's a little shame. And it differs from people like Berlin Gould or Cecil Shaw, with a nice detailed accounts of who it was and what the environment was like when they met. And what the conversation may have been. So I call Anne Gilchrist a fragmentalist because lots of her archive is small bits of paper, and putting it together, it's rather like putting a jigsaw together. Put it in some kind of order so you can make some kind of sense of it, rather than a detailed account of what that may have been. But it's a shrewd observation, yeah.
Yes. Could I just ask, I think the figure was 77% of songs collected from women in Sunderland Point.
Yeah.
Was it the one woman that was...
By and large, yeah. There's another lady called Mrs. Edmondson, a couple of servants, some are called Olive Barrett, but predominantly, I think I calculated, I think about 97% of the songs collected in Sunderland Point came from Mrs. Bowker anyway. So there's really, it's the dominant voice in Sunderland Point is Mrs. Barker.
So similar to Mr. Bolton and Southport, is that how... you mentioned about Mr. Bolton and Southport.
Yeah, only from the fact that the lowest number of songs collected from females is in Southport, because most of the songs in Southport came from Mr. Bolton, retired sailor. So that's why that figure differs from Blackham and Bard and Sunderland Point, yeah.
Didn't Barbara just come from two women? Mrs. Carlyle and John
Carlyle
Collinson's wife.
and Agnes and John Collinson, yeah.
Thank you, Peter. That's really fascinating talk. I'm interested in the children's section of the stuff that you collect, and I'm just wondering, is there much of that, and is there unusual things there, or are they fairly standard from around the country?
I think they're fairly standard, but she does go into a few things. I just thought it was quite an interesting observation that you've got the orphanage in Southport, which when it was at its inception, I think in 1897, it was about taking children from evil environments because they had no parents or their parents couldn't look after them. And the songs that they were singing a few years later, "My coffin shall be black, my mother has killed me," differed so much from the songs she collected from the children in Blackham, where they perhaps were still in a structured family, and their songs are much more folk songs, Cottage in the Wood, Farmer's Boy, stuff like that. She did quite a lot of reviews about children's games. Again, they'd be in the journal somewhere. She never wrote anything down in book form, and there's no publications, and there's no compendium of games that Anne Gilchrist has collected from children, or songs she's collected from children, or indeed anywhere else. But she was interested in it, and very often some of the letters are in communications with other people who are doing similar kinds of work, or even preparing a speech on children's songs games, and they're asking her for some information or advice. Was that actually your question?
Yes, thank you. But actually, there was one other thing, the talk that she gave on all ballads and their characteristics. Is that does that exist, or do we have that? The talk that she gave, the temperance.
Yes.
We have that talk.
Yes. It's in chapter 2.
Excellent.
slide.
Page 37. Yeah, much more detail about that. Yeah.
Brilliant. Any
Thank you
further
very much
questions?
indeed. Thanks.
Well, can I just thank Peter one more time and all our presenters for a very interesting